Please let us know about what is Flywire.
First, thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody spending time. So Flywire is an international payments company. It was started by Igor Marcade, a Spanish international student loan at MIT. He paired up with myself and our CTO, and who had payments experience. And we raised venture capital money, and we built it in the United States initially. And the business has grown over the last 5.5 years, has grown to process about $3 billion of international payments. We have 130 employees across 7 offices globally, and we have clients like Globus now in 18 different countries. We have 1,200 educational institutions using Flywire to collect international payments from students.
What is Flywire? What is so good about Flywire? And why lots of institutions decide to use your services?
Yeah, so we're one of the many companies that, as part of, what is referred to as the fintech revolution, disrupting financial services that are old and antiquated. And what we went after is the international wire system, so the way in which money moves between banks, typically in very large quantities. So what we've, in essence, built is we've built a network of bank accounts around the world where funds are collected locally. So funds can be collected, for instance, in euros. They go to a Flywire account. They're then converted for students maybe studying in Japan, and we deliver Japanese yen to our clients. We have a web interface that parents and students use to pay Flywire, and then we have an administrative interface, another web app, that in essence our clients use to understand what students have paid, what payments are outstanding, and they don't have to worry about which ways they have to pay in various countries. Flywire handles credit cards, bank transfers, things like Alipay and PayPal. We support all the ways in which people want to pay so that our clients don't have to deal with the complexities of international.
How cheap it is?
It's about half of what you typically pay from a bank wire. So when you send an international bank wire, usually you pay a transaction fee to send it, a foreign exchange percentage spread, which is typically 3 to 4%, depending on the country though. And then the receiving institution receives a fee. Typically, again, it's about $20 United States roughly to receive an international wire. And so we remove the 2 fees, and then we charge somewhere between 1 and 2% typically. So about half off of what the bank would charge.
So Flywire is convenient, speedy, and cheaper, and user-friendly. So this is good.
Yeah, it's great.
That's why Globus has decided to hire and ask for your services to be introduced to our students. So how did you get engaged into Flywire yourself?
Yeah, so when I started off my career, I'll start beginning my career, I thought I was going to consult. And I was working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, a big global consulting company. And I went to visit a friend at a startup. Supposed to just have lunch, and he was busy fixing the product. I met the CEO, and the CEO said, "Don't go work at a big consulting company, come try out a startup." And he offered me a job on the spot. So I ended up not going to PricewaterhouseCoopers. I went to a startup. And that company was a company called eDocs. And in the late 90s through 2004, we put all the e-bills online. So when billing was very paper-based, and specifically in the United States and Europe, there were a lot of paper checks being written to pay bills through the postal systems. We put all that online, and our company grew up to about 50 million in revenue. It was bought by Siebel and Oracle, so that was my first experience at a startup. And so I had payments and
What was your role?
Yeah, I started off as a front-end web developer. So I had a technical background. I went to an entrepreneurship school and had a finance and information systems degree. And I started off actually doing front-end web development. And I got pulled into client engagements, and I led projects. I got reluctantly pulled into business sales, actually. And so.
And then what's next?
So when we sold to Siebel, I took over the billing and payments product for about a year. And then when Oracle bought Siebel, I went from, I guess, a 100-person company to 5,000 to 55,000. And at that point, I was ready to go back to a small company again. So 4 of us left Oracle, and we went to found a company on the West Coast called CareerIQ.
So you founded?
Yeah, we were part of the founding team. Yeah, and it was a great experience. It was a big data company with wireless technology. So what we did with the wireless cell phones, we were selling software, big data analytics software to companies like Apple and Google and AT&T, Verizon Wireless, the big operators.
So you went to West Coast?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah, it was in Mountain View, California, so right down the street from Google's.
I see. And what happened?
Yeah, we grew that business quite significantly, again, to about 30, 40 million in revenue. That was kind of the point. And then it recently got acquired by AT&T. And so after about 6 or 7 years there, I met Eker Marcade. The friend I went to visit at eDocs happened to be employee number 2 at Flywire. And so I went to visit the founder, Eker Marcade, and he needed someone to come in and help scale the business. And so I joined, about 5 years ago now.
As?
First vice president, so vice president of sales, marketing, and business development. Eker asked me to join the board of directors about 9 months in, so I joined the board, and then I became the CEO just about 3 years ago.
And then you grew the company?
Yeah,
CEO.
yeah. We were doing about $200 million in volume at the time, and this year we'll do about $3 billion. So the company's grown significantly over the last 3 years.
I see, that's good. So what is your founder doing right now?
Not much. He's a multi-millionaire at this point. Doesn't have to work, so I say he lost weight. He runs every day. He looks nice and healthy, and I have the job. So he actually he started an incubator in Spain. He's very much a social entrepreneur.
I see.
So he started an incubator which has made numerous investments in Spain. He lives in Valencia. He also just launched, I think, some new Montessori schools. So he's building up Montessori schools. He has a couple of young children, and he's funding and staffing the schools.
So he doesn't come to like Flywire?
Day to day, no. He's out of the day to day. He's still a big shareholder. Has obviously made a lot of money off the business, and he's a great advisor to the company. But
Has he exited his investment?
Not all of it. No, he's still a large shareholder.
But Flywire is still a private company.
Yeah. So we're privately held, raised venture capital money. So we've raised $43 million from Spark Capital, Fidelity Investments, which is a big global financial brand, and Bain Capital. Those are our lead 3 investors.
Okay, so I'd like to open up for questions for you to ask to Mike.
Happy to answer questions about financial technology, Flywire, building a business, raising venture capital, anything.
Everything is fine. Yes.
So how do we actually, for instance, I would be a customer, how do we set up an account, basically?
Yeah, so our model is all based on partnering with our clients, which are the institutions. We integrate typically into the billing process. So when you get a bill, you'll see Flywire referenced as a way to pay, where you would traditionally see a bank wire information or potentially a website to go to pay your bill. There's a Flywire page, and when you go to that page, you can pay which method you want to be paying, which currency, whether you want to use a credit card or a bank transfer. You make those choices, you set up an account right there, and you can transact right online.
Yes.
And how it is with capital control country? Like in some country they control like currency, and you cannot transfer the money that easy.
Right. Yeah, it's extremely tricky, and it's on a per country basis. But heavily restricted countries. India, for instance, has very special forms that have to be filled out. China has regulations where only certain companies can remit money abroad. So what we've done is we've built out partnerships with banking institutions that are regulated in all the various markets, and they've set up accounts so that they perform the regulated function in that given country. They'll collect the various documentation that's needed in that market, and they're typically banking partners of Flywire. They're used in the process to make sure we're compliant in the various regions. We support about 80, 90 different currencies right now, and probably about 150 different payment methods. So.
Yes.
I had experience of using Flywire. When I was using it, I was curious about the exchange rate compared to the bank exchange rate because I was trying to Google it and see their exchange rate compared to different countries.
Yeah.
So the reason why I'm asking is because besides the 1 or 2% service fee you're charging for the profit, you actually make the profits from their exchange rate.
Yeah, so the only place we make money is on the foreign exchange rate. So we provide a markup, that typical 1 to 2% depending on the country, is where we make our money. So we don't charge our client institutions anything for the service. We don't charge a transaction fee. So what we do to try and make sure we're the most competitive price is that we We partner with local banks so that we're converting currency locally as much as we can. And then we also, if someone is able to get a better rate, we have what's called a best price guarantee. So we'll match any given rate so that we know that we can beat that rate that that person would be getting. The hardest part is education of the consumer, right? It's so easy nowadays to Google. And you Google an exchange rate, and oftentimes the rate you can Google isn't the rate you can buy. And so that is probably the biggest challenge that we have in educating the consumer is that, you know, as does anybody, right? You go and you Google, and at the end of the day, that isn't the rate that you typically get. Your bank will usually charge you fees at the end of the process that aren't obviously really disclosed well on their website. So that's by far the biggest challenge of running the business. But we actually don't require anybody to convert currency with us. So we give it as an option. So if someone wants to convert with their bank, we still allow them to convert with their bank and just deliver to us. You know, in essence, for Globus, it would be Japanese yen, right? So your bank could always convert currency, and you could send us yen, and we'll just deliver yen to our client.
So
Yes.
how can you ensure the security for a user? Or
Yeah.
you
Yeah, so the way that money moves is through the bank accounts that we have. So what we do is we heavily invest in, obviously, information technology security, but also when the funds are actually being moved, we're purposely not using any, block Bitcoin or digital currencies to move the money. The money's actually being moved through the foreign exchange network, so in the banking system. So we do have the security of, our biggest banking partners, which are Citi, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, and JP Morgan Chase. So the money's sitting in those institutions, and then we're also segmenting that money from Flywire funds. So the funds we use to run our business are never commingled with our clients' funds. They're all held in trust accounts. Good questions.
Yes. Yes.
Out of curiosity,
Yeah.
how did you start your second one, the venture company that you started?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was there were a bunch of engineers with some technology that was spun out of another company. So back when we started it, the smartphones really hadn't evolved, right? It was the kind of iPhone hadn't been launched, the Android devices hadn't really been launched. And what was interesting was that this technology was built by engineers in another company to diagnose software problems on mobile devices. And they were mostly analog and digital phones, right? So it was mostly radio antenna, signal drops, things like that. As the smartphones emerged, it became really clear that no one could diagnose what was going on in the smartphone. So you had a wireless carrier trying to identify what happened on the phone, and all they would see are their towers, their radio towers. And then you'd have folks like Google and Apple trying to launch phones, and they wouldn't know if their phone was performing well or not. And so we took this technology out of another business. We raised venture capital for it, and then we built a big data analytics company, which put a software component on the mobile phone and then had a cloud-based analytics platform. And that allowed the data to be distributed out. So it was interesting because the technology actually came from another company, but we needed to raise venture capital to split that technology out, which was ultimately a diagnostic software that was working on modems and various things.
So you sold the company to
AT&T bought it, yeah.
Right. How big was the company when you sold?
It was probably about 30, 40 million in revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of seems to be the sweet spot for companies coming along looking for technology, that kind of 30 to 100 million in revenue. It's a lot of acquisitions done.
Yes.
How did you find out the model of the Flywire works originally?
How did we come up with the concept?
Yes.
Iker Marcade, actually, our founder, had a hard time paying MIT. So he was a Spanish student enrolled at MIT. He sent a bank wire to MIT, and he couldn't enroll for classes. They said they didn't have his money. And so he was, as any good MIT student would do, he set out to fix the problem. And he tried to understand why didn't they have his money. And his money was actually sitting in MIT's bank account. The issue was MIT didn't know it was his money. Right? So they couldn't identify or match the money. And that's because the information that gets passed along with an international payment is very limited, right? And especially if you're an international student, the names that you may use, or in his case, the order of his names was different, right? And so it became very difficult for the school to match and identify that payment. And so he realized that he as a student got a very bad foreign exchange rate, and that in addition to that, the school couldn't spend a lot of time trying to find his money. And so that was the concept originally.
Interesting. Any other questions? Yes.
Aside from universities and schools, what other types of institutions are your
Yeah.
clients?
Yeah, so we just launched, this year we launched medical hospitals as well. So what Flywire was really built to do is help with large dollar payments or large sum payments, because those are the ones that typically go over the banking rails, right? It's, if it's small amounts, you can move them between wallets, you can use credit cards up to a certain size, but when you get into thousands of dollars equivalent, it's very difficult to move money cross-border. And so healthcare is one of the areas where I was actually meeting with the CFO of one of our clients in University of Miami in Florida, and they have a medical hospital. And the CFO of the school walked me over and introduced me to the medical hospital and said, hey, they have the same problem. They receive lots of inbound wire payments. They can't identify them. So that's our first vertical outside of education. And then we're looking at other vertical opportunities. So anytime there's a business or any institution that's trying to collect money from, it's very difficult. And there aren't a lot of good solutions other than bank wire. And so that's how we're going to try and continue to grow Flywire.
Yes.
Will it ever become a customer instead of institution?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing that we constantly hear from our clients, which are the institutions, and then the consumers that interact with us, is that movement of money, and I think that's the macro trend in financial technology right now. There's lots of companies trying to alter the way in which money moves and even the form that money takes globally. So I'll never say never. I think there's a lot of evolution that will happen in financial services. What I want is that I want Flywire to become a way in which people feel confident in moving money, and that may be between their own bank account someday. If there's someone that's holding multiple bank accounts around the world, or someone that has traveled the world extensively, you folks are great examples, right? People are traveling the world more frequently, right? The world is getting smaller. And I think there's going to have to be significant change in how financial services work, where you keep your money, where you store your money, how you get charged for moving it. So I think that's going to go through a lot of change. So we're very focused on our business right now and growing it as it is, but we're also making investments in some strategic areas. So I won't say never.
Yes.
What's your long-term vision for Flywire, or where do you see Flywire in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's very tied to this question. I think money movement is going to change. Anyone that's followed Bitcoin and digital currencies, developments in blockchain technology and these shared ledgers, money I think will move more easily, and the ways in which fees have been assessed in cross-border payments in particular is going to change. For some reason, anyone that sends money is charged a lot, but anyone who collects money is also charged, right? So all these things are happening, and I don't think there's transparency in it either. So where I see the company really evolving is helping consumers, businesses, institutions collect money abroad, and ultimately someday potentially even move money, hold money in what could be multi-currency accounts all over the world. I think people are going to have less relationships with financial institutions, and they're going to do more things with bigger institutions, right? No one wants to have 10 different relationships to deal with their money, or 5 different banks. They want to consolidate that. So I think some company is going to own that, and I think what Flywire's job is to take that cross-border aspect of it and try and own that. And I think it will fit into a bigger fintech picture eventually.
So right now you're working on C2 institutions,
Yep.
tuition,
Yep.
and then going to medical C2 like hospitals,
Yep.
and then in the future B2B as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
Because I used to work for Sumitomo Corporation,
Yep.
they handle lots of foreign currency transactions. So you're going to that area.
Yeah, that's a great example. Businesses, right? Businesses they constantly ask Flywire to help with their business, right? Because they're invoicing cross-border, they're having to set up entities in different countries just to collect, they're having to get bank accounts, get finance teams, right? They shouldn't have to do that just to operate, and almost every business nowadays is global, right? They have customers or suppliers in another country. Real estate's another good example, taxis. There's lots of different use cases that people are paying cross-border.
Any other questions? Yes.
In a way, banks are your competitors because they are the ones who wire money.
Yep.
But they are also your partners.
Yeah.
And you say you're offering lower rates than banks. So what would banks get out of this?
Yeah, great question. And that's, I spend a lot of my time, and so does Ryan, who's back there, heads up our product team, working with our banks as strategic partners. And that, I think, is the irony in a lot of what is Flywire, but also what is financial technology, right? I think a lot of people talk about disruption and how people are going to disrupt banks. Banks are not going to go away, right? I think what's really being disrupted is the poor expectations that the consumers have had, right? They've been given bad services or they have been treated poorly over the years, and that needs to change. And so I think that's where the disruption is. I don't think anybody's going to kill banks overnight or take away banks. I think you need them, as does Flywire, to move money and to hold money in financial accounts. I think what the banks are having to do is they're having to deal with a very complex global environment where their costs are going up, regulation is going up. And so what they do is they look at companies like Flywire as ways in which they can innovate without actually building it inside the bank, which is very, very difficult. So what companies like, what banks like Citibank and Barclays and JP Morgan in particular see with Flywire is that companies like us allow them to innovate and do things and generate fees. They make fees off of Flywire, right? Where we pay them banking fees, we convert our currency with our banking partners. We just do so in a very large quantity. And so for a bank to go and try and get 1,200 institutions, educational institutions in 18 countries to work with them would have taken them a long time. We did that in less than 5 years, right? So I think they see us as innovating in pushing new business models. And I think they also are aware that some of the old economics of banking are going to change, and cross-border FX is one of them. I think those fees are going to come down, and they're going to have to generate their revenues through other ways. So they've been good partners so far, and I think that's going to be interesting to see, because we're not out there trying to kill the banks. We just think that the banking services and financial services have to evolve and have to be better for the consumers.
I heard Flywire name from a venture capitalist. Well, Globus has two major businesses. One is running private school, and the other is venture capital. And in venture capital, we did research on the fintech area. And one of the companies came up to the list was Flywire. And I heard of the name before Megumi told me about your transaction and your idea. And then I thought like let's use it. For the moment I heard this would be a very good idea. And talking about fintech, like fintech is actually dismantling the banking system, and so the banking is going to be dismantled. And then currency transaction is going to be done by Flywire, and lending will be done by some maybe lending club or some kind of credit research is done by other companies, credit tech. So there will be lots of fintech companies globally will be dismantled and then take over banks role. Could you please tell me about the future of fintech and how do you see the fintech evolution going on?
Yeah. I think there's certain areas. I mean, if you look at the evolution of banking in certain markets, in the United States in particular, retail banking has been shrinking. Global banks' footprints where they have physical presence is going down, and they're moving more towards mobile and digital. As you mentioned, lending, foreign exchange, all these different areas are being targeted and being dismantled, right? So I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be that dismantling that happens at a global scale, right? So companies are going to help move money cross-border, and that's going to be for different use cases. I think oftentimes people look and say, there's one company that's going to win. I think when you look at why money's moving, look at foreign exchange, why money's moving cross-border, it's not one reason, right? Some folks are sending money back home, right, to parents and grandparents. Some people are moving their own money back and forth. Others are making bill payments, like with Flywire. So I think all those are different use cases, and there's gonna be companies that even target individual use cases. Same thing's happening with lending, where different lending companies are targeting different use cases. So I think it's gonna need some time for that to play out. And the question will be whether those services are aggregated again by the banks, and the banks get aggressive to own some of those aspects, or whether they're happy just running underneath those services. Because like even lending, the banks are behind lending, right? Most of those lending companies don't actually write on their own paper, they're writing on top of a bank's paper for lending, right? So a lot of those things still need banking infrastructure, but the bank isn't delivering the end-to-end servicing.
In case of banking infrastructure, foreign currency exchange is being taken over by Flywire, but actual transfer is being done by the banks, and actual accounts are being held by the banks. But there will be sometime in the future transfer to be done by some other fintech company, and bank accounts maybe maybe Apple or maybe something like Google may be holding your bank accounts, and that time will come. And so we'll see how the banking sectors will be evolving because of this fintech evolution. And now that this small company which has come out of the MIT student is not taking over foreign currency exchanges. So I think some of you may be starting up some kind of fintech startups. Any questions? Yes.
May you please know your thoughts or advice to students or people who want to pursue the entrepreneurial path?
Yeah. A couple things. I get asked this question a lot, and I love answering it. If you're trying to come up with your own idea, and you have a great idea, I always tell people to be very clear on what your founding team looks like, right? If you look at Flywire, right, Eker found 2 or 3 key individuals that ended up helping build Flywire into what it is today. Without that right founding group or team, and when I say that, it has to be someone that can either build a product, right? You need the people that will build the product, and you need the people that can sell or market the product on that founding team. That's what a lot of venture capitalists look for, right? Is that team rounded off, right? Everyone can have an idea, but do you have a unique team together to execute on that idea? I think that's probably the most overlooked aspect. Some folks will have the idea, but they'll need the venture capital money to move the idea forward. And oftentimes, I know the venture capitalists that I'm very close to will look and say, if you don't get my money, what's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months? Can you get the idea from just a concept on a slide to a prototype, or can you get 1 or 2 customers? So I think making sure you have, if you not only have an idea, but who are the right individuals or skill sets you need on that founding team to get that idea off the ground, because I think you need that positioning, because you may not get the money right away. And I think if you have that right founding team, you'll find a path. But I see a lot of folks struggle with that, where they have a lot of marketing or management consulting background on the founding team, but they don't have any engineering background, for instance. So I think that's one of the most important points.
Look at Mike's career. I think the biggest turning point was when he didn't go to Pricewaterhouse.
So that's what my wife said too.
Work for Edox. And I think the best way to pursue entrepreneurial career is to join entrepreneurial companies and join the community, and so that you hear about what is going on, you see the future, you make networks, and you feel that you want to do something, and you meet some a future potential partners, you may start up a company. And I think that's one way to go. So it's either going to Pricewaterhouse, which is also a very good career path, by the way. Also working for entrepreneurial community is a totally different career path you will be taking. So I think the best way is to join entrepreneurial companies and then see what you can do in that community and see the future and try to take risks.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to ask, when you graduated, what was your state of mind leaving out a lucrative job?
Yeah.
You were already pressured by the school.
Right. It was worse because my father and brother were both accountants too, so I was running away. I was the black sheep. So I was running away from where everyone else had made money too. So, a couple things that went through my mind. I got that experience very briefly. A few months. I interned with PricewaterhouseCoopers going into my senior year. I worked for them a little bit before I graduated. So I had a little concept of what big corporate life would be like. And then I got, I always say I was bitten by the startup bug because it does feel like that sometimes. You know, if it's meant for you, you can't see yourself going a different way, right? Once you have that feeling. And so, you know, I remember having a lot of hard conversations with my wife, who we were just married at the time. And I went home and told her that I wasn't going down this path, I was going to go risk it with this company. And I kind of knew that I wouldn't have to worry where my next meal would come from. I had a family that would, you know, if anything really went wrong, I was not going to, you know, be on the street. So those decisions were important early on. But then once I jumped in, it became a question of, you know, in an entrepreneurial environment, there's no ceilings to what you can do. And so I ended up being 23 years old, being relocated to London to open up an office for eDocs, our first company. I was selling throughout Italy and France and the Netherlands and the UK, right? And I was being put in positions that most 22 or 23-year-olds wouldn't be put in. And that wouldn't have happened at Price Waterhouse, right? I would have been on a project team. I would have been doing some level of, reporting work as part of a bigger project. So in some ways, I like to say a startup, if you can pick the right startups, which is the hard part, there's a lot of ones out there that don't have real business models, or it's a very risky decision on which startup you go with. But if you can get with get experience in a startup environment, I like to say that your career advances faster, right? 3 years in a startup is like 10 years potentially, right? Because you're getting exposed to a lot more faster. And so for me, the decision to go was one I had to think through, but once I had experience, I knew I would never, I won't say never work in a big corporation, but not spend a lot of time there probably.
By the way, how old are you right now? How old are you?
I just turned 38.
38. So 3 years in startup is 10 years. That means like you've been 10 years already. That means like more than 50 years already.
It's like dog years.
Dog years. Any other questions? Yes.
So what were the key points when you started going with the tech company? Like, what made you think about like this is the right person for me to work for? Help out?
Yeah. For me, it was I had to understand the business model. So I left school in the late '90s. So in the United States, it was the .com bubble, right? And actually, the company I had joined was all set up to go public. Right? So I joined 6 months later, it was all set to go public, and it should have never been public, right? And we were able to see the bubble burst before we went public. And so we raised additional capital and we built the business up. And that was a saving part of that company's story. But it had a very real business model, right? It was building technology to reduce the cost of billing, to streamline customer service. It gave real benefit to big corporate billers. So I could see the actual business model work. And so those are the companies that I've been drawn to, are ones where I can understand the benefits to all the parties. I haven't been in a company that does, social media, or, I'm going to build the next mobile app that is going to go viral, right? That's just not what's drawn, an interest level for me. I like to find businesses that help various parties and either reduce costs or improve convenience. When I look at Flywire, one of the things we're trying to do is make a process simpler so people can get on with their lives, right? We don't want them to spend time and energy worrying about how their money is going to get from point A to point B. We want it to be quick, easy, simple, convenient, secure. And so for me, when I look at businesses, I look at, is it solving a real problem? Right? And it sounds a little silly, but are there people you want to work with? Right? And are they people every single day, even though I'm very tired sometimes, I'm jumping to get out of bed every morning, right? And I think my whole team is. We like to come to work, we like to work with each other, and that's very, very powerful, because work is a big part of your life, right? So if you don't like it, or you don't like the people you're working for, if it isn't inspiring, then I think you'll have a harder time as you go on in your career. So those are the two things that I look at.
Maybe last questions, like one, yes?
Well, I had experience using Flywire before. Like in August, I paid the education fee to go please, but then 2 months later, I got a charge from the agent fee from your Deutsche Bank, and I contacted customer service and said it was a mistake. So how can you ensure this kind of thing won't happen again, given that you're going to move? We're going to try to target to the consumer, which is, I could be one of them as well in the future, how you can ensure that it's going to stay in contact.
Did we cover your fee?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
we
did.
did. Okay, that's what we're supposed to do. So one of the challenges you have as you're building a global business for us is those bank relationships we have, right? There is no truly global bank, right? Almost every bank has regional banks underneath it, right? They've all come through acquisition. And so one of the challenges we have when we expand our footprint is that sometimes the fee structures aren't right. Sometimes the first bank we start with in a market is not the right bank for us longer term. Sometimes a bank that is local isn't actually as local as it should be. And some fees come out on our consumers. What we've tried to do in those situations is to protect the consumer, right, at a cost to us, right? And so by no means is, as my wife always tells you, I'm not perfect. I don't make perfect decisions. Flywire, she tells me that every day. Flywire isn't perfect either. And so we constantly are trying to improve. What I can tell you is that every piece of feedback we get from a consumer or a client is read within seconds of being submitted, right? And it goes the entire company, right? So on my phone, we use a product called Slack. Does anyone know about Slack? Multi-billion-dollar company now. Awesome product. So Slack is implemented across Flywire. It's how we communicate. Every piece of feedback from our clients or from the consumers goes into a channel in Slack, and the entire company sees it. Our customer service team is on top of it. I see it. And we read literally every piece of feedback. And so those things are great because it shows us that we're not there yet, we're not perfect. And we probably never will be perfect, but we hope we're making a better and better service as we go on.
Any other questions? Okay, so Mike, thank you very much. As you may have noticed that our students are very entrepreneurial. And simply because you may have noticed that you met so many education institutions, and we are totally different. We are very entrepreneurial. We always try to educate visionary leaders who create innovative societies. And so that our institution itself is only about, let's say, 10 years old as a university. So those students have chosen not Harvard or Stanford, which is a very legacy, universities, but our universities are more entrepreneurial, more innovative, and more forward-looking. And it was a very good chances for you to be coming over, so that students can hear from your experiences about real entrepreneurial story. So with that, I'd like to thank you again.